Good morning, guys. It's Foster again. I was reading in the Old Testament in First Chronicles, and I was in chapter 23, and I encourage you to read that verse for your own, well, chapter of the Bible for your own, and to draw the same truth that the Lord kind of had me draw from this. And in the chapter of the Bible, what it goes on to say is it goes on to speak of what the Levites' duties are, in the temple and the things that the Lord had set them apart to do. And that key word set apart kind of got this thing rolling in my head. We as Christians are set apart, but what are our duties in being set apart? And the first thing that came to my mind was the Great Commission. And we can find that in Mark chapter 16 and verse 15. It says, "And he said unto them," Jesus, "Go ye unto all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." Right before Jesus ascended into heaven, he told his disciples, and he had someone write this down to tell us at this point in time what our duty, what the command that God has given us is. And that is to go into all the world and preach the gospel. And that is not limited to the church and the duties of the church or the things that the church does, such as bus routes, juvenile detention center, meetings with all the kids that are, in just a lot of hurt, or even prison ministries or senior home ministries. That's not the only place that the Great Commission is to be played out. The Great Commission is to be played out in everybody's life, in everyday life. If God has called you to be a welder, like my friend Simon Truckner, or if he's called you to auto diesel, or if he's called you to the mission field, or if he's just called you to the run-of-the-mill business work, wherever God has called you to, that is your mission field. Your duty, the command that God has given you, is to tell the lost where you work about Christ. And that is not even just limited to where you work. That is also can roll over into politics. And that's a touchy subject with Christians, because I'm writing a report, an argument essay about it. And the argument essay is about why I think Christians should be in politics. And I'm not, trying to, tell you what you should and shouldn't do or anything like that. But I'm telling you that the Word of God gives us a command to go into all the world and to preach the gospel. And what better place than in politics? If God has called you to politics, then run for political office. Go into a higher office in the land and show people who you are as a believer and what it is that you stand for and why it is that you stand for that. We as Christians have the ability every day to tell the lost about Christ. But politicians are seen by not only the people in the United States, but also across the world. See, America is looked at by the world as a Christian nation. But do you see very many Christians in politics anymore? You don't. And as a result of a lack of Christians in politics, corruption has reigned supreme. A moral compass that used to be present is no longer present. Christians in politics implement something. They implement a moral compass, a set of standards, a degree of living that is far greater than what is there today. And we see that what is there today is not helping this country. There's so much dissension and so much, there's such a gap between the Republican Democratic Party. We say that one party's the evil one and one party's the good one, but you see people on both sides being paid off to vote a certain way, not to vote what the people said to vote for, which is another reason I think that Christians should run for political office. And I know people are going to be like, oh, well, they can be paid off too. But if God has called you to run for political office, God will give you the strength to say no. And you, as a Christian, know to say no to that. because you are speaking on behalf of the people, not on behalf of those that have money. That is the thing that I want you guys to understand, is that Christians are to be in every area of this world. Even the highest office of the land, as President of the United States, we should have a Christian president, which we do now, thank the Lord. But we also need to have Christian senators and congressmen, Christians on the school board to prevent them from taking Christ out of the school any more than it already has been. And to reinstitute Christ into the school, to reinstitute Christ into every area and every aspect of life. At one time in America's history, God was a part of every area. He was in the schools. He was in our government. He was in businesses. He was a part of everything. And in those days, we saw prosperity. And in those days, we saw many come to know Christ. And in those days, we saw people understand that it is a calling, a duty that God has given us to go into all the world and preach the gospel. Not only as a pastor or a missionary, but as a businessman, as a doctor, as a nurse, as a welder, as a plumber, whatever it is that God has called you to do. That is where your duty lies, is in preaching, teaching, and telling the lost about Christ. And that includes politics. Because when Christians are present in politics, we're able to represent Christ on a higher level than we are right now. People are able to see Christ through us. People are able to see why Christ should be present. Because of the moral compass that Christians have, because of the care that we have for those that are hurting, and for a sense of understanding in the part of those that are hurting. We as Christians need to be a part of every area of life, not limited to just the things that the church does, but in our jobs and in politics. If we want to see a difference in this country, if we want to see a real change, then Christians need to be present, not only in the activities of the church, but in our sole duty to preach and to teach the gospel to the entire world where it is God has called us to. Because God has called many of us to politics, to the trades of the United States, or the trades of the world. God has called many of us to just Medicare duties, such as a doctor and a nurse, police officers. All of us, of every aspect and every walk of life, have the duty to tell the lost about Christ. God has given us that duty and that command, and we need to see that that command and that duty is fulfilled everywhere, including politics.